I'm Sean Fennessy.
I'm Amanda Dobbins.
And this is The Big Picture, a conversation show about manifest destiny
Oh my God.
and apocalypse now. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the weekend's two major releases, a franchise hit, and maybe the start of a new franchise. We'll dig into A Quiet Place Day 1 and Kevin Costner's long-awaited Horizon and American Saga Chapter 1. Chris Ryan will join us for our very spirited Horizon discussion.
Well, so I'm going to pull back the curtain here. We've already recorded the Horizon part of this conversation just for, schedule reasons. And I've been thinking a lot about our Horizon conversation since we recorded it.
What a tease for the second half of this show.
I guess so. Definitely listen to it. And I guess
two men desperately trying to convince a woman this is okay.
No, that was not even it. It was all the three of us just being like, all right.
That was the vibe. That was the vibe.
It was, but everyone, it's a cultural artifact for sure.
Yes,
so if you have 3 hours and, money for the tickets and childcare, or not because you made better choices than we did, go see Horizon just to know.
They're an interesting contrast, these two movies that we're talking about today, because Horizon, I feel like, has been a running gag on the show for a very long time.
Sure, yeah.
And A Quiet Place, this is the third installment of the series, called A Quiet Place Day 1, is a movie that I just wasn't thinking about at all. I had no anticipation for this movie. I had no negative feelings towards it. I just was like, that will happen. I'm sure we'll see it and discuss it, and I don't really know what to think. Lo and behold, this is one of the great surprises of the year for me.
Really?
I thought this movie was really exceptional. So, and maybe it's because I had no expectation.
Sure. I thought it was very good.
Okay.
And I thought it was very effective. I was really moved by it for 45 minutes of this movie, which I saw on Thursday night with a preview crowd. Most people I've seen in a movie theater in 2024, but that's also...
Oh, yeah, me too. Packed house.
But that's also because I went at a normal time. And for the first 45 minutes, I was like, I just want to go home and hold my son. I am moved and upset and stressed out, and it is hitting all of both the terror and emotional sensors that it is supposed to in a really, really effective way. I think it gets a little sentimental towards the end.
It does.
And there are two choices that I was like, all right. But
I would argue this is historically a very sentimental franchise.
It is.
There are the big moments of anguish and pain and reflection and memory from the first two movies are also pretty saccharine. So it's a little bit part of the design, I think, of these stories. It is an apocalypse movie after all.
Yeah, I think that's true. But we'll do the basic premise, which is, it's A Quiet Place Day 1. So it's the day all of the alien monsters who track everyone by sound show up. And this is all in the trailer, I think. It's they show up in this case in Manhattan.
Yes, New York City.
And so we are in Manhattan, and Lupita Nyong'o is there. And if you don't want to know anything, don't listen to this podcast.
We won't spoil the ending of the movie or anything like that.
Yeah,
but we'll talk about the plot
But
itself.
this is revealed in the first 10 minutes, but also I wasn't paying that much attention, so it was new to me when I saw it.
Okay.
Which is she is terminally ill and she's living in hospice. And I was like, and as soon as you learn that, you're like, oh, okay, so I see what this is going to be. And I think that's actually a very smart choice. This is going to be about the realization that you're going to die and about death and sickness and acceptance and your last moments and all of these things that I think are very smart and affecting choices within the context of, okay, so what happens if you're day one of the apocalypse and you're going to die. And probably most everyone else is too. And the world is kind of ending. What would that be like? So she is in hospice. She goes to Manhattan with her
hospice care group.
Her hospice care group to see a marionette show. And then the attacks start. And so it becomes sort of a survival story. I mean, she
Absolutely.
is trying to survive, and she has a goal. And she has her own...
there's something she wants.
There's something that she wants and that she wants before she's going to die, which she knows and which she also knew at the beginning of the movie. But it's... Then another character comes in and...
They forge an unlikely bond.
Yeah.
The way you do in the
way
apocalypse.
You do. And so you're right that the other movies have a lot of very saccharine... They're very Reitman nuclear family coded. But there's something that is like, we have hundreds of years of culture and tradition of like being nuclear family coded, that like instantly means something. And this is just like a random stranger who shows up from Wales, Kent.
From Kent, yeah.
From Kent.
Yeah.
And a cat who...
That's the nuclear family of this film, is
Sure.
Lupita Nyong'o's character's cat, who
Right.
she carries with her through much of the film and who is routinely in danger. This feels like a very strong homage to Aliens, which is a very similar story to Aliens, where one woman is moving through the apocalypse and all the men around her are getting killed.
Yeah.
And she stumbles on a kind of found family. This is not the most original movie I've ever seen.
No.
I don't think that's a strong case for it.
But I would also say that like this found family does strain credulity at times.
Well,
in a way that when you're working with like a nuclear family, we are willing to give the benefit of the doubt.
I thought that part of it worked for me personally, because I think if you
like
found
the cat is making too much noise, like just like stop right there.
I do want to talk in a separate portion of this discussion about, the first film has this problem in a big way, where there are a lot of things where you're just like, you just wouldn't do things that way. You just wouldn't let your 2-year-old walk behind you when you're walking back from your purchases at the pharmacy. You remember that famous opening sequence of A Quiet Place, that just wouldn't happen. And there's some things in this movie you just wouldn't let happen.
So stressed out thinking about trying to keep Knox quiet for any.
I just don't think it would work out.
It just wouldn't, and that was
same is true for my family.
And that was part of the power of this movie, which is, there was this thing of being like, well, it's not. We know ultimately what's going to happen. And so you're living in this fear of like, oh God, for how long am I keeping this person from making, or in my imagination, how long am I keeping Knox from making a sound before the worst happens? And I'm like trying to build an ideal circumstance in which this like weird, flower petal monster comes and
you just have to imagine the reason that the character stuff worked for me in this movie, and the other critical character who comes along is played by an actor named Joseph Quinn, who is not super famous yet, but is about to be in Gladiator 2 and the Fantastic Four.
And Bobby informs us that he played a mentor role on a season of the Stranger Things, at which point I stopped listening.
Yeah, I haven't gotten that far in Stranger Things. I'm sure I definitely will. I definitely will catch up with every
Throw to
episode
Gen
of Stranger
Z.
Things.
Tell us what you know, Bobby.
Should I just remain silent on this one because I'm not Gen Z? Like, what's going on here?
Are they done with Stranger Things?
No, they're not done.
No, but it has
There's
been like
season.
4 years, it feels like, since they put something out.
They filmed it, right? Because Maya Hawke has been talking about how she was on it and was like helping the other kids reach closure or something.
I don't know if they filmed it. I do know there's one more season, and I know that the episodes are all like 1 hour and 37 minutes long, and that they're all have the budgets of A Quiet Place Day 1. Anyway, Joseph Quinn, you may have seen him in Stranger Things. You're going to be seeing a lot more of him. He is a man who comes along and encounters Lupita Nyong'o's character.
He plays Caracalla in Gladiator 2. Do you know who that is?
I don't.
Marcus Aurelius Antonius, better known by his nickname Caracalla, was Roman emperor from 198 to 217 AD.
Oh, interesting. So he's in the Joaquin Phoenix role.
It seems like it.
Interesting. Okay. That's great. I thought he was really good in this movie. I thought he was a compelling presence. And this is a very specific kind of acting because, as you said, you can't really talk. There's not a lot of dialogue. There's not a lot of communication other than writing things down or making eyes at someone to indicate what you want. And he and Lupita Nyong'o, I thought, had good chemistry. I thought, it's a little ridiculous because it's an apocalypse movie. But movies like this, the whole time I was watching the movie when I wasn't feeling that tension that you were talking about was... This could have gone so wrong.
Totally.
Like a movie like this with like too many characters, too big a view, sitting in like the war room with generals talking about how to attack the creatures. Like, that is not what this movie is. This is a very contained story that is focused on basically 2 people and a cat for its entire runtime. Right. And that was a really, really good choice because it doesn't mean you don't get the monsters pursuing people and killing humans and having these moments. Yeah. You do get that stuff, but you stay with these characters the whole time. And so, for example, like the sound design is critical to all these movies. Yeah. The sound design in this movie, again, is very, very good. It's a different form of it. This is not a farmhouse. It's New York City. And the movie opens with this note about how New York City is loud and represents like a certain number of decibels. And so it's like a constant, scream.
Can we do a spoiler section a little bit? Because I had some logistical
Yes, but let's
questions.
wait.
No. That's what I'm saying. In a
Yes.
little bit, because that sets up some logistical things, which I think the movie actually handles really well.
For the most part.
I mean,
I have some
listen,
thoughts too.
Like, obviously, like, as soon as you're walking in rubble, there's sound and
Well,
game
like,
over.
The whole movie, I was like, creaky door?
Yeah.
Creaky door? Like, how many doors are being opened in this movie?
Right.
One creaky door,
And
you're dead.
And just like, are we, whatever, we'll get into it. But in terms of, to your point, instead of doing the war room and so many people, they do pretty concisely and effectively convey what's going on and what you know in the moment
And how
what
the world
you need
is
to do.
reacting.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I agree.
And I thought that even if like we have follow-up questions, that's because they did a good enough job that I'm like, okay, I'm interested and I'd like to know more.
I'm totally with you. I was pretty impressed. I think that movies like this are hard to pull off. This is the third movie in a franchise.
Yeah.
It's a prequel.
The other thing about it, I thought it was like quite sad.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
it was, which is an interesting place for the third like movie in this
I agree.
franchise and a summer blockbuster to go. I was like, oh, this
kind
is
of brave.
Yeah,
How it ends.
like, sort of.
But it's not like, and then here's what happens next. You know what I mean? Like it's not giving you the
Yeah,
trappings of that kind of a movie.
Yeah, I mean, it has like slight back to black syndrome in the very last moment in a way that I was like, come on.
Yeah, I thought it was a little cheap, but I
Yeah.
liked that it wasn't like
But
she survives to
but
do this thing
it
now.
went
You
to
know?
the place that it needed to go and that made sense.
Yeah.
So it's just like there are a few other tonal moments
Mhm.
where I was like, I would have made a different choice, but I agree. It's surprisingly good.
One other thing that I thought was good about it, before we start getting into some details
Yeah.
that people may want to skip if they haven't seen it yet, is this movie was shot on a backlot in England, Warner's
Right.
backlot in England. I thought it was a pretty good approximation of Manhattan for a backlot shoot.
Well, yeah, apparently also in the Warner's backlot in England, they have Manhattan cities as they
Pre-built.
do pre-built
Yeah,
as they
yeah.
do here in the
Yeah.
Burbank lot
Yeah.
where we've gotten lost
But
several
still,
times.
I mean, the thing
No,
about Manhattan is
totally.
like it's scale. And this is a
Yeah.
movie that needs scale because you've got these creatures crawling all over skyscrapers. And I
I
thought
thought
it was pretty credible.
and the
you
effects
know?
were pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in all, like, I don't know. I know this movie is going to be a big success. And it's the
Right.
reason why we're talking about this movie first in this episode, because a lot of people are going to go see it. It really could have gone sideways. The first two films were surprising successes. All of a sudden, this is one of the sturdiest franchises now.
Right.
Because this movie's probably going to make $50 million.
I am interested to hear how everyone who's like, yeah, Quiet Place 1 and 2
Responds to this
responds
melancholy
to,
film.
Yes, like in this meditation on dying.
Yeah. It's a good point.
It's and like
They
I
may
was,
not have
I
a great
was-
cinema
Yeah, I was
score.
having a conversation with a friend who like doesn't often go to see movies, and she was like, "Oh, should we go see A Quiet Place Part 3?" And I was like, "I haven't seen it yet, not really sure." And she was like, "This looks less quiet than the other two, so maybe
It is and it isn't.
But
You know?
and that's what I said. I was
Yeah.
like, it is and it isn't. But
Yeah.
I do wonder. We had different expectations than I think a lot of people who like Die Hard show up to see Part 3 of a horror franchise.
What do you think is the difference in our expectations?
We were just kind of like, is this a good idea? Do we need to,
Right. Right.
Should
As opposed
we
to like, let's go. We need
Yeah.
to see more. But you get a lot of monsters. Like it's not like they don't pull punches on all of that
That's
stuff
true.
too. You
I
do
was
get,
startled a couple times.
Yeah. So Michael Sarnowski, I haven't even mentioned his name. He directed this movie. He co-wrote it with John Krasinski, who of course was the director of the first two films.
Mhm.
And Sarnowski directed Pig, the Nicolas Cage indie from a few years ago.
Yeah.
I had him on the show. Really thoughtful guy. Honestly, when I saw the news that he signed up for this, I winced. I was like, ugh, really, man? Like, you made this really strange film about a chef who goes on like a rampage that I thought was a lot of fun. Nick Cage gave a great performance in that movie. You're going to sign on for the third installment in A Quiet Place? That sounds like such a bummer. Prove me wrong.
Yeah.
Good choice. Like, I think this probably now allows him to make a bigger and more interesting movie after this. So kudos to him. It's really impressive. So there's a thing that Lupita's character wants, and maybe we'll get into. Let's put a spoiler warning up now, because I really wanted to know this. Even as I was watching the movie, I was like, well, I wonder what Amanda's version of this is.
Yeah.
So spoilers going forward for the next few minutes. Lupita Nyong'o's character, desperately before she dies, and before the world ends, wants to get a slice of pizza from Patsy's Pizzeria in Harlem.
Right.
Patsy's Pizzeria, place very near and dear to me. I've been there many, many times with our friend John Caramonica.
Yeah,
That's a place
yeah.
he and I used to go to all the time. Not necessarily the one that she went to. I think we went to the one in the 80s, but nevertheless, love Patsy's. For me, it was very easy to be like, I get it. This
I do get
New York
it, though,
pizza means a lot.
So just to be clear, also the reason that she needed to go to the one in Harlem was because her dad, who was a jazz pianist, she would go see her dad perform, and then they would go next door to Patsy's. Because I did have that moment of like, why can't you go to the one in the 80s?
Right,
or I believe at one point there was one like under the Brooklyn Bridge, which has...
I think there are like 4 or 5
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Manhattan,
I was like, if Patsy's is what we need, but it's this very specific location.
Yes.
In her defense and in the defense of...
And she needs to go from Chinatown to Harlem during the apocalypse.
Yeah, which also she gets to really quickly.
Yeah.
And it's like at one point you see a street sign for Essex Street and then suddenly you're in Harlem and you're just like, well, also at some point she randomly finds the home that she hasn't lived in for some time because she's been in hospice care, but they managed just to make it back to her apartment.
Yeah.
To look for medicine.
Seemed like a good place to hang out.
Yeah.
I would have stayed there probably.
Speaking of looking for medicine, so they should...
That big bay window, that was great.
No, it seemed like a great place. And obviously it would not just like be sitting empty.
Right.
In like New York real estate and Manhattan. Also, so I think she has cancer because she does a poem at the beginning about, she's a poet.
Yes.
But like we said, she's in hospice. So they make a point of showing you that she is using fentanyl patches, which then at one point, the Joseph Quinn character goes and retrieves for her, which is very heroic. But like, I think we all know those patches would be under lock and key in like a really, really intense way. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's a very fair point.
I mean, you like can't get deodorant at Target now without like, waving like 45 signs for people. It's like, I think we all understand that, but that's okay. That's all right. It's
honestly,
the apocalypse.
A great call.
Thank you so much.
There are a number of moments, as I said, like the creaking doors thing occurred to me a lot. There's a lot of different noises that you would make in the day-to-day execution of just trying to go 100
you're
blocks.
herding a fucking cat around
literally
with cat food in the tins. And I was like, okay, from a noise perspective, what's going to be better, tins or like the crunching of the dry cat food?
Good cat, though. I like the cat.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
You're not a cat person.
I was just like, this is not plausible. And the number of times that the cat is gone and then finds them in the rubble of Manhattan in an apocalypse.
That's how cats do. That's how they do. I grew up with so many cats, man. They always come back.
But also like the cat is at one point in Chinatown and then suddenly knows where Harlem is. The cat finds the apartment before Lupita does.
Great sense of the world.
Okay.
These creatures are fantastic.
You understand what I'm saying. I'm so glad that you put this quote about the cat in our outline.
This is the funniest thing I read about the movie. You want to read it?
Yeah. The actress, in this case, Lupita Nyong'o, had asked Sarnowski, the director, if they could change the animal due to a fear of cats, which she ultimately overcame with cat therapy.
What the fuck is cat therapy? What is that? What is that, like a cat wearing glasses with a notepad, like asking her questions about her trauma?
I feel like it's more like a cat cafe, But like
cat therapy is my favorite thing.
It's just also Lupita's like, yeah, sure, I'd love to be in this movie, but one of the 2 other characters, can we just totally,
That's pretty good.
Because I'm absolutely terrified of cats.
I would just like to say Lupita, who for whatever reason has not become the massive star that I think many of us expected her to be after 12 Years a Slave and Black Panther,
and us,
like just put her in more of the stuff like this. Like
she's great.
She's great.
She's so good at it.
She just holds the screen. Like we were talking about Costner and McQueen and all those guys. She's the exact same thing. She barely talks in this movie, and the whole time you're like locked on wherever she's going, whatever she's doing. She's a really wonderful screen presence.
Okay, so can we talk about Manhattan and the bridges for a bit?
Yeah.
All right. So as we said, everyone's in Manhattan, and they get like a radio signal announcement pretty quickly to avoid the bridges. And then we see all the bridges being taken out.
Exploded. Because
we know and are reminded, I think succinctly and well, that the creatures can't swim.
Right.
So is the implication there that they're just like, good luck to everyone in Manhattan? We're just containing you? Is the implication that the animals aren't elsewhere? Because you see a globe where she's noted all the other places.
The cities,
So like they're on the mainland.
Yes. I mean, you may recall in the second film that they so Djimon Hounsou is in this film, and he was in the second movie. And so that's the connective tissue
Right.
between the second film and this prequel. And Djimon Hounsou's character, I think, discovers an island where they create a kind of like Valhalla for the remaining civilization.
Right.
And that's where Emily Blunt's character ultimately goes in that second film. And I think the idea is that, you know, it's a communication to humans that they need to find a boat to take them out of South Street Seaport. And once everyone gets on the boat, they can go find a safe place where the creatures cannot get to.
Okay.
And I forget, I think in the second film, like a creature boards a boat and they don't realize it. And that's how they bring the monster to the island that leads to the. I didn't rewatch the second film, but anyway, like if you went to, you know, Lummi Island.
Also, I mean, they get back from Patsy's to South Street Seaport
very fast,
just like incredible,
alarmingly fast. Yeah. I mean, we don't know how much time is going by. I don't know. It's unclear what's happening.
Right.
I did enjoy the sequence where she finally gets the pizza and they show her, you know, that profile shot of her like just taking a bite of pizza, because when all you want in the world is pizza, and you get pizza,
that is true.
The purest rush.
Yeah.
There's not a drug in the universe that could create the feeling for me that I really want a slice of cheese pizza, and I got one. It's just beautifully conveyed in the movie.
Were you going to ask me what my version of Patsy's is?
What is your Patsy's thing? Do not say the teacup.
No. I would try to go swimming in the ocean.
Well, you're in luck.
I know, and that would work out for me.
That would be great.
I would want to get to the beach, you know?
Okay.
Coney Island seems a little far.
I mean, you could go wherever you want now.
Rockaways. Yeah, no, I know.
You could go all the way to the Pacific if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Head down to the Gulf of Mexico.
The thing that I would want to do before I know I'm going to die by like weird aliens, I like
swim in the ocean.
Well, I mean, besides like see my family, you know?
They're already dead. Everyone's dead.
God, that little kid hiding under the fountain, like the 3-year-old, that was
hard for me to watch.
That was excruciating. I was like, if this kid is in the whole movie, I might have to leave.
I actually
really,
felt so similarly when they disappeared. I was like, great, thank you.
I was like, I just like I hope they're
it's
okay.
The most cliche,
like, I can't
dumb,
watch
annoying parents conversation, but that shit is real.
Sorry, guys.
When you're like, oh, all I can think about is my child in these circumstances of this dumb alien invasion monster movie.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, pretty fun movie.
Yeah.
It's good. I was happy. I hope people check it out.
Since we're doing spoilers,
yeah.
I mean that song choice at the end. Come on.
It wasn't good.
It was
bad.
That was.
I wish it was better.
Yeah.
It felt like a very normie kind of a choice.
Right. And just trying to do the like it's okay thing.
Yeah.
When it's
I'm with you 100%.
Okay,
I didn't like that as well.
Also magic. Come on. But
absolutely wrong. That part is amazing. I loved that part so much. The marionettes and the magic.
The marionettes were cool.
I was like, quiet performance. That's a brilliant idea to bring that into that movie.
I thought that they were going to have her sit at the piano and put the iPod on then and have her dad's music and have that moment, which to me would have been nicer than this rando just being like
close-up magic. There's nothing cooler in the universe.
Okay.
Just
All
putting
right,
that out
you're
there
a
for you.
nerd.
Okay, great conversation. Let's go to our conversation now with CR about Horizon. Well, Chris Ryan is here, and he's here for a very important reason. It's because we're talking about the film Horizon, an American Saga, M- Chapter 1. This is the long-awaited first installment.
You've used a hyphen and not an M- in the doc, just so you know.
What an incredible error. Jesus Christ.
I like that you specified M-, but
I probably just copy and pasted that from somewhere, so maybe it isn't an M-, but if it isn't, it should be. That's my take. This is Kevin Costner's Big Gamble. It's a movie we've been talking about. It has been talked about in Hollywood for a very long time. In fact, its origins are over 20 years ago when he wanted to start making it. It's long awaited, and it's here.
And we've seen it.
And we've seen the film.
Yeah.
And
we've seen part 1. You haven't seen part 2, have you?
I have not seen part 2, which is going to be released in 6 weeks. This is an incredibly unusual...
For my 40th birthday.
Yes, quite a gambit.
And find out how it works out.
We'll be all sitting together.
No, I don't.
Holding
because
hands.
they're parts 3 and 4.
Well, maybe.
Maybe.
Currently, Costner is attempting to raise all of the necessary funds for this film and for the second film. He has poured, according to the reporting from our pal Zach Barron, who just so happens to be married to Amanda, $38 million of his own funds into the film. It's a Western. It's a classical Western in many ways. It is a multi-part, multi-generation story about the expansion of the West and the settling of a town that is meant to be kind of a representative story about what happened in America. Chris, did you like the movie Horizon?
So you remember last time I was on The Big Picture, just a few days ago when we were talking about the bike riders, and I was like, there are certain things that I have unlimited interest in. Turns out the West is also one of those things.
We know.
I like spaghetti Westerns, romantic Westerns, military Westerns, TV Westerns, which is helpful. Lots of different kinds of Westerns. And so I liked Horizon.
What is it that you like about Westerns? Break it down for me.
I think that the scenery is just fucking gorgeous.
It's quite beautiful.
I enjoy the fulfillment of and playing with archetypes.
Okay.
As a guy, I love
You love when a man has a gun and he shoots it at another guy.
Yeah, but sometimes he misses.
Yeah.
You know?
And there's a damsel
sometimes. And there's a rule of like when you can draw your gun. Yeah. There's all sorts of stuff going on.
What about when there's a saloon? And there's a saloon keeper.
Yes. And mining is also incredibly interesting when you bring that into play.
Okay.
Or the building of railroads or the policing of said lands.
Yeah.
I'm interested in all of it.
A train robbery.
And I got all of it in this movie.
You sure did.
Every different kind of Western that you can possibly imagine is inside of Horizon, except for the story of the, like, a story. There's not a story. Like, it's just...
I mean, except for a story. There are a lot of stories.
There's tons of like plots, but there's not really a story in this movie yet. And that is a huge, it's a big ask. It's a big ask for a lot of people out there. Amanda and I saw it together. I think we sat in separate rows, but at various points I felt
smelled? Was there because someone smelled bad?
No, it was because we both knew it was a 3-hour movie, and
we needed room to spread out.
And we needed room to if I wanted to go to the bathroom, I didn't want to step over.
If I had joined you, I would have sat right next to Amanda, and I would have just looked at her the entire time the film was running.
What did you think?
You and I are very similar in this way. I have a lot of affection for Westerns. We were talking a lot about the Westerns of Kevin Costner on the podcast. And anytime I started talking, I could feel Amanda like starting to slowly melt into like a puddle form.
Yeah.
Because he's a very, very traditionalist Western filmmaker, but also I think he thinks he's more subversive than he actually is. And I think that this movie thinks it's maybe a little bit more subversive than it actually is. But there are moments in the movie where he's scratching a very particular itch, where there's just a showdown and a gunfight between two guys. And he really knows how to shoot, block, and cut those sequences. And I'm like, this fucking rules.
It's really funny because I went home from seeing the 3-hour Horizon Part 1, and my husband, Zach Barron, had seen it already many months ago because he was doing a story on Kevin Costner. And we were rehashing it together, and just he very excitedly was just like, but when the two dudes show down, you know, in the mining town, and it's Costner and that's other guy, and they're just walking up the hill, and I was just like,
great scene.
And
it's
I
a
was
great
like,
scene.
Dudes love it when dudes are just showing, you know, have a showdown.
Yeah. I think that, you know, there's effectively 4 different storylines in the movie. There's a kind of a prologue that introduces us to the ultimate destination, I think, of the story, which is this town of Horizon. And then
that's the little kid in the glasses who's doing the surveying.
Yes. There's another...
That was a cute kid.
Yes. And that's kind of like a flashback.
Well, I know. It's tough.
There is a town that is raided by a Native American tribe that is can be forced to relocate. Many of the residents there are killed, and the survivors are sort of relocating with members of the army that are helping them move.
They're going to a cavalry force.
The cavalry force, yeah.
And can we call that the Sienna Miller plotline?
That's the Sienna Miller plotline.
Thank you.
The second plot line is Kevin Costner's plot line, which is taking place, and that's sort of in San Pedro area.
That's in Wyoming.
The
first plot.
The first plot is in San Pedro. The second plot is in Wyoming. The second plot is
we
Kevin
should
Costner.
have a map.
We should have a map.
We should have a map,
and you guys should be pointing at
as far as things that this movie was lacking, was maybe a map.
I mean, for me, like a
very,
very detailed family tree,
like a Game
with
of Thrones
also
style
names
opening
and photos, so that I could keep the various guys apart.
Just like a little Raiders, kind of like now over here.
Well, I'm getting into plot description as I say what I think about the movie, because I feel differently about every part of the movie.
Sure.
And there are some parts that I think work really well, and others that I don't think work that well. And you know, the third part is a classical wagon train story where Luke Wilson's character, I'll say that's the Luke Wilson plot. Luke Wilson's character is moving through Montana. And the point of the movie is that there's going to be this convergence ultimately in this story. That by the time we get to
town that is called Horizon,
Right.
and you know that because you are shown the poster advertising the possibilities of Horizon.
there's a
this
mysterious
settlement.
figure we don't know who is behind, almost mythologizing the eventual settlement of this town.
Right.
So those are all of the pieces of the puzzle.
You forgot one piece. There
the
is
Native American portrayal too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there is that. But then there is also another group of dusty guys with a kid
Right.
who show up and the kid is at the very beginning.
Right. That's kind of an offshoot of the Sienna Miller story.
Yes. But I couldn't remember. I did not connect him with that.
Right,
So I
those
thought it
guys.
was just like a fourth.
Yeah.
Remember, I walked
Yes.
out and I was like, who's that guy? But there's a kid. And he meets up with another group of individuals who are possibly threatening Horizon.
Potentially, and they are also a group of essentially of scalp hunters.
Yes.
And so you there's 5 different moving storylines throughout this film,
Right.
and it's a 3-hour movie,
Yeah.
and it feels it's 3 hours.
Yeah, and Kevin Costner
Well,
doesn't show up for
until 1
1
hour.
hour.
And
1 hour in.
the way you isolated them with the Sienna Miller plotline, the Kevin Costner plotline, and the Luke Wilson plotline was accurate in the sense that corresponds quite literally to 1 hour chunks
Right.
of the movie. I did sue me, but I checked my phone for the time when Kevin Costner showed up because I wanted to know
you should
how
be
far
careful
into
'cause
the movie.
Costner might sue you because he
That's true, 'cause he needs
to make
the
his
money.
back.
And it's literally at an hour, and Luke Wilson
Shows up at 2 hours.
comes at it 2 hours, like almost to the minute.
Yeah.
So you can talk a lot about this movie's pacing or lack thereof, but there is structure within it, and it is organized sort of around those 3 major
and so
storylines.
Because of that, I'm curious if you guys agree with this.
No one asked me what I think of the movie, by the way.
What did you think of the movie?
I didn't dislike it.
Yeah.
But the way that you're grounding it in plot is my response was like, I don't know who half those people are when I left.
So basically what happens is when Kevin Costner's character arrives an hour in, first of all, the movie obviously gets a huge jolt of star power because it's fucking Costner and he's like doing this iconic mythological photographing of himself. But there's kind of an epiphany that happens shortly into his run where you're like, oh, they're not all going to meet during this movie.
Mhm.
Like, you know, like that,
Mhm.
and I think that is really worth talking about because this movie makes How the West Was Won look like Michael Clayton in
Yeah.
terms of like the tautness of its plotting and the urgency with which it moves in any one direction. I am in awe of the fact that this is what he chose to do and am totally here for it because I just really love watching horses and cowboys. Like I really don't mind, but it is like the lack of like, we need to end this with something so that people like feel like they completed a movie
Mhm.
instead of an episode of television is
Right.
crazy.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about How the West Was Won as the comparison point because that's a movie that he talks about all the time as the like originating film that made him want to make westerns that he loves. It's a really unusual movie. It's a movie shot for the Cinerama Dome in a very specific shooting style.
Yes.
It has 3 different directors, 3 different storylines. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes. It's Henry Hathaway, John Ford,
George Marshall.
and George Marshall. And 3 different groups of characters and very star-studded, like Henry Fonda and Jimmy Stewart and, Carl Malden and, like lots and lots of people.
The
in
Costner
movie.
Mount Rushmore.
Yes, a lot of the strong white men of yore. And the difference between that movie and this series of movies is that that's a movie that is very purposefully 3 distinct visions of a critical part of the settling and expansion of America. This is one guy who's like, I've got 12 hours of characters in me.
Yeah.
And
In 1 hour installments.
yes. And
That
so
I'm going to release close, in
making my point.
3-part chunks
It
over
is
the
TV.
span of it is
It's
quite
TV.
literally structured as TV.
It is TV.
Yes.
And it looks beautiful at times, though I'm having a very hard time forgiving him for shooting this Western on location in
Digital.
Utah on digital.
Why
I hate
didn't
that
you
he did
raise
that.
the money for the film, Sean? Every dollar counts.
I wish he would have just shot it on film. It seems like a small thing, but I think it would have been a big thing for making the movie feel less like TV.
Yes.
And he's been on TV shows in the West, shot on digital for a long time. And when I look at Yellowstone, I'm like, this is like a cheap soap opera. You know, like it's shot on location in Montana, but like who cares? It doesn't look that good.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also something to the visual language of the movie, like how the West was run, how the West was won, like you said, Cinerama, so that it looks basically like it can really only be properly viewed in this one kind of experience, and even for years afterwards, I think home video, or DVD versions of it would box it way in.
Yeah,
this is like. There's no reason this couldn't have been on Paramount Plus.
It's quite strange. I mean, I know that he loves movies and he obviously is fighting for movies, but he's also just spent the last 5 years not making movies. You know, he's been making a TV show.
Yeah.
So, you know, narrativizing it is really interesting, but you're right. Like the way that he is framing the stories, it's not as though he's consistently cutting hard intercutting between storylines to show us the variations between these characters. It's happening a little bit in the movie, but like once we get all three stories revealed, we see some intercutting. And it's so hard to grade the movie in any meaningful way because while I was watching it, I had a good time.
Yeah,
I liked it. I liked some of the characters. I really, especially like the wagon train sequence and the fact that it came so late in the film. I feel like this is the best Luke Wilson has been in a long time.
Got really excited for Chris when Luke Wilson showed up because I'd forgotten he was in it, and I was just like, "Hey, it's your guy."
Huge for your stock.
Of Omaha calls another great American stock.
Well, it's not too late to be Harrison Ford for Luke Wilson, but I left at the end of it, and of course, it's as it's been reported, it does end with this sort of like next on horizon trailer sequence.
This was when Amanda and I psychically left her.
He turned around, and I was just like, "What is happening?"
You know, it's not a spoiler to say that the film just teases what's happening in Chapter 2 at the end of Chapter 1,
but not with a title card that says "next" in the next installment of Horizon.
Yes.
It just starts a long trailer for Horizon Part 2.
What'd you think of that choice?
I was already confused because I didn't know who that little boy was.
Yep.
And then and I had no geography of where is Horizon?
Arizona,
yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, all of it's very beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was just amused. There were a lot of horses riding in that. And I do like that. I like the horses.
It felt very much to me like the Mad Men teasers at the end of the episodes where it would be like, there'd be one guy who'd be like, she said what? And then there'd be another guy who'd be like, don't go over there. And then like everything was this completely disconnected, decontextualized series of sequences.
But it's funny because of the way it's presented, like at the end of the trailer or the end of the preview, like the reveal is that Giovanni Ribisi is...
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Is the landowner... Or it might just be working at a printing press, printing up posters.
Yes.
I can't tell.
Yes, we don't know.
So he might be like the
Kittredge, or not Kittredge, the guy who owns all
that's
of
right,
Horizon.
because they like very dramatically hand this person like silhouetted in the window, like the poster, and it's the Horizon poster we've been seeing. And then I was like, "Is that Giovanni Ribisi?" And then all the lights went up, and
it's very funny because the movie has this very big cast.
Mm-hmm.
And in the first installment, like some people die. And I was like, oh, wow, that person's just gone now in the first 48 minutes of this movie. But a lot of the men in the movie that have been cast are guys who are like, I don't trust that guy.
Sure.
You know, it's like, it's Jeff Fahey, it's Michael Rooker,
Jimmy
it's Will
Russo.
Patton, James Russo, who's, you know, we did not mention him during the Hall of Fame, but James Russo appears in like almost every movie that Kevin Costner's directed. Danny Houston, of course, legendary, like don't trust him guy. Thomas Hayden Church is going to be in the next one. And it's kind of like he's trying to create like an And Then There Were None Agatha Christie's style Western thing too, but it doesn't totally congeal because the movie's just too big. Like there's no way to get all of these characters close enough to each other to make the story seem coherent yet. And so to release a movie like this, which is basically just a prologue.
Yeah.
It's like a series of character descriptions for the future movies. I can't think of another movie like this.
I mean, you remember what your reaction was when you realized it was going to be Dune Part 1. You know, like you were watching Dune and you're like, oh, they're not
right.
You know,
you're right.
But like we already knew that this was going to be an episodic saga.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I was prepared for the way in which it was going to be written and executed on a level where it was like, oh, we're getting 3 or 4 movies within this 3-hour block of time.
Yeah. My version of your Costner realization was when I realized that Sienna Miller was not intended as Kevin Costner's ultimate love interest that we know of.
Yes.
Could
and
still happen.
And it could still happen, but suddenly Sam Worthington is just wandering around with an American accent, sort of. And then you have Abby Lee playing Marigold.
Yes.
And there's, I don't know what happened to her. I honestly was pretty confused as to why she left and who that guy was.
Mm-hmm.
But once you realize that it's not all within the bounds of everything is orienting towards who Kevin Costner is going to save and fall in love with and what he's going to do, you're like, okay.
Let me ask you the question, though. So if you took away the digital photography, the Elmer Bernstein kind of style score, is this like a truly avant-garde movie that's masquerading as like a summer blockbuster and a traditional Western? Or is this, dude, could you really not get Chris McCarthy to give you $150 million to make this as a miniseries?
I don't think it's as avant-garde as I would like it to be, because I think those instincts are just slightly beyond his reach creatively. I think there's a big difference between weird and purposefully outside of the expected mainstream.
Yes. Okay.
And I think that there is some weirdness in some of the decision making. Again, like I kind of want to take the movie apart and put it back together, because like I said, I watched it and I was like, that was cool. I'd like to see the next one. That was kind of my takeaway. Like I'm happy to watch another one of these movies. If I was a regular consumer of movies, though, I don't know if that would be my reaction. I think my reaction would be like, when does the movie start?
The question also is, I had this very funny conversation with Tyler Parker the other day where he described his grandfather going to see Outer Range twice in 3 days when it was in theaters. I don't know if those guys are going to like it too.
That's sort of what I'm saying.
Because if you go see like one movie a year and you're like, I've been waiting for this one, man.
Yeah.
And then you go and he's not in it for an hour, I think you might be a little bit disappointed.
The first, you know what? You're right. The first 30 minutes is very avant-garde, where he's like, what I'm going to do now is continue to introduce people who don't have names, and they're going to occupy a space that I don't explain to you. And you're just going to have to understand over the course of the telling of the movie what I'm trying to do here. But also, I'm not going to finish. So my vision will not feel complete in this communication of 3 hours. Like, why not 4 hours? Why not 2 hours? Why not do 5 movies at 2 hours each? Why, I don't really understand mechanically how he landed on these series of decisions. Because when the movie ends, you're like, what? We're right in the middle of this plot line.
Yeah.
You can't not, you gotta, what's going on with the wagon train? Like, where are we going next?
I'm trying to remember the actual.
Chris texted me an hour later. He was just like, I'm thinking a lot about that couple on the wagon train.
The British couple, there's a British couple on the wagon train. And they're such a television pair of characters.
Yeah.
Because I have a hard time imagining that in 2026, when this grand cycle is completed, that Juliet and Hugh will be like, and that's how we found Horizon and started the greatest cattle company in Arizona history, bringing British farming techniques to the desert.
Her full name is Juliet Chesney.
Chesney.
Yeah.
And
allegedly.
So you kind of have a sense that these are supporting characters. I do believe her being peeping Tomed while she takes a full body bath on the trail.
Supposed to a half body bath.
And then these two simpletons watch her, and then they're like, well, we didn't really like that. And Luke Wilson is like, I'm going to go tell these simpletons not to do that again. And that's like this ominous end of the conversation where they're like, you're actually not in charge.
Yeah.
That's like, isn't that the way the movie kind of ends?
Not exactly. It's close to the ending. But that scene I loved because I was like, this is a movie scene.
Yes.
Are these guys going to blow Luke Wilson's head off right now? Like, this is, to me, I was like, this is a fucking Western movie. This is a great Western movie scene.
And he knows it. He's like, if I go tell these guys what not to do this, I'm going to have like a confrontation. We're trying to keep things peaceful on this wagon train. I thought that was really cool, but I was like, why the fuck is this happening in hour 2?
Why are we stopping here?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, are we making sense? I know we're...
Yeah, sort of. I mean, by 2.5 hours in, I was just sort of like, there are just like a lot of people and
Mhm,
a lot of,
mhm.
you know, vistas just washing over me. And everybody is kind of getting their 5 minutes of exposition. I think at some point I just gave in and I was like, okay, you're going to tell me something else.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Which is a little bit how I watch TV. I mean, not to keep beating that particular thing, but I was like, okay, now I'm supposed to learn this about this person. And I wondered, their very last scene is actually, it's in a rainstorm and they're sitting there and they're giggling together in a way like they have some sort of secret. And I'm like, oh, are you pregnant? Like, are you setting up like the next generation of like wagon train stuff? But that's in that mind of the TV guessing of,
Mhm.
you know, okay, so what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? So I guess in that sense, it worked for me because I was just like, well, I'm just trapped here and they're just going to be new people and I'm going to have to learn what's going on with them.
I think that there's something cool about the idea of taking some archetypal Western characters, like the man with no name is essentially the Hayes Ellison Costner person who's like, you know, I'm rolling through the plains unencumbered. I don't depend on anybody. I don't get hurt. And he immediately gets thrown into, I saved this woman
Mhm.
and now I have this woman and a child with me and all this stuff kind of going forward. And it's basically like, I like that, like, you know, the Sienna Miller character is this like fierce homesteader woman who falls in love after her husband has been tragically murdered. Like there's kind of something about like taking the types of people you meet in Western films and almost throwing them into TV story that I thought was effective, but just odd.
But isn't that so similar to what Taylor Sheridan does? I'm not as up on what he's doing, but I'm like, it's so weird that he's just like, I got to get off this Taylor Sheridan show so I can make a Taylor Sheridan
make my
show.
own.
No, that's the whole
but
reason
that's
why
the thing.
people loved
That's Kevin Costner.
83 was that like it was like movie pacing of plot where like characters would die or stuff would happen. You'd be like, oh, that's not gonna happen until the end of the season. And it's like, oh my God, that just happened in the 4th episode. Like this is crazy. It's like the Ozark thing of like everything that happens in the first episode of Ozark would normally take a season to get through.
Right.
He does that a lot with his shows until they get to season 3, and then he's like, all right, well, we'll do this now. There's something to that, like to the. I definitely feel like Taylor Sheridan has a huge amount to do with the way the story is told, which is hilarious because there is a world in which he could have just been like, yeah, I'll keep playing John Dutton. I'll be on the biggest show on television, thus giving me a much larger platform to promote this passion project that I can kind of tick along doing in my off time, and they just couldn't make that work.
It's very curious. I know Costner is iconoclastic through and through, and we talked about that Vanity Fair story from 1989 where even then he's like, I don't care when someone says something is too long. I don't care. The script has to be what I want it to be.
Mhm.
I have my vision and I'm sticking to it. And this is one more example of it. And it's in the year in which that keeps happening. This is the year of Megalopolis. Like these boomers are doing what they want to do. They're going to finish their stories in the way that they want to.
Zemeckis is like, the camera stays here.
That's right. I mean, another great example of somebody who's like, I have an idea about what cinema is, and you can't push me off it. But then you watch it, and you're like, these guys might be a little old.
A lot of old men. I understand. I mean, we have to have Coppola and Costner in the same conversation because they have self-funded two sprawling epics that are facing theatrical cross currents.
Yes. It's a very gentle word for what they're facing. Yes.
And Matt Bellany just did a great episode on The Town about like the financial stakes of Horizon in particular, and then they do bring up Megalopolis, but like, man, Costner's not Coppola. He's just like Kevin. The situations are similar, but like Costner is not Coppola, and some of the choices in this, and even just the choice to be like, you know what, I'll just do my version of Yellowstone, and because I can and I want to, and because I don't want to be doing someone else's, seems to be what's happening here, and it's not bad.
I mean, they're importantly bound by the fact that not only are they two hugely successful people who both won Best Picture, Best Director, who have been responsible for very memorable aspects of Hollywood in the last 50 years, but neither of them could get any traditional studio here or abroad to actually pay for their movie. And so they both have found ways to effectively broker distribution-only deals from studios in America. And so essentially it's all on them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so having seen part one now, would you guys say that Kevin Costner's gamble was worth it?
I am really reticent to like evaluate something artistically based on like somebody's personal financial investment in it. I do think that unfortunately the way in which people consume films now has changed so drastically since the last time he made a movie, even Open Range, that it's hard to imagine like part 1 even being in any theaters by the time part 2 comes out. Like, I don't understand even. So you only people who will see part 2 are those who saw part 1. Then there's going to be a natural.
Just going to see part 2.
What?
It's a great
but
bit.
there's going to be a natural attrition from those numbers anyway. If people will be like, it's not for me. I
didn't
will
like
not be
it.
seeing
Yeah.
part 2. So part 2,
I can just wait to see it at home.
Exactly. And
As
this
I
is
watch
on
all my
Max.
other episodic westerns.
So the upside of that conversation is that he owns the movie. So whatever distribution channel he decides to license it to, I'm not sure if there is a negotiation
thing?
with Max there already. There may be, but either way, in perpetuity, he'll be able to make it available wherever he wants. If he wants to license it to Paramount, he can do that if they so want it. If he wants to put it on the fucking Criterion channel and they want it, he can do that. So it's a really interesting thing because he's counting, I think, on a lot of downstream dollars to make
specifically
clean.
DVD sales at Walmart, which is a thing that he said.
He says that, and frankly, his fans do still buy DVDs. You know what I mean? He obviously has an older fan
Sure.
base.
You are
Yeah.
fans.
I own a lot of his films.
Yeah.
But I think he more means. I think PVOD streaming,
Yeah.
all that stuff is in theory. This is not not a corporately owned product, and that's very unusual.
That, like, if this had just been done in a less like, fuck it, Jobu, I do it myself.
Mhm.
Like, he could have done something where maybe like CBS was like, this week we are airing Horizon in its entirety at like a mini-series event. Like, there
Yeah.
are so many creative ways that a partner could have like maximized this, and instead it's like, nope.
It sounds like they didn't want it. I mean, it
I'll
sounds
see
like
you
they
at
didn't
the
want it.
movies.
You know, I mean,
Well-
he hasn't talked about whether or not he asked the TV network if they wanted this, right? That hasn't been posed to him as far as I know.
Right.
It feels like it's made for TV, with the exception of the fact that like it's in Monument Valley.
Yeah, I mean, the other problem is that in terms of the financials of it, is just before I was just reading about how the West was won before I walked in here. 1962 adjusted everything, whatever. Cost $15 million, made $50.
Yeah.
Has every big movie star in the world in it, and it cost $15 million, and they made $50 million, and was a cinematic event because you wanted to see it projected across the screen in a certain way.
Yep.
This has got Sienna Miller and Sam Worthington, and it costs $150 million to make or whatever. Like,
When they're done with all four, it's going to be hundreds of millions.
yeah. So I think that's like pretty indicative of like where we're at, like with the business side of this stuff, where it's just like these things don't make sense anymore.
There is an interesting thing that is happening with filmmakers, though, and I think that there are children of Costner and Coppola and all of these guys who continue to assert control, which
Like,
is
literally children, like Sophia, or
no. Well, of course there are.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of Kevin Costner's children have gone into filmmaking, but the sort of the descendants, the creative descendants. So obviously Tarantino reportedly made a deal with Sony when he made Once Upon a Time in Hollywood to regain control of the film.
Coogler. Yeah.
And now
Mhm.
Ryan Coogler is making this movie for Warner Brothers next year that after, I don't know how many
20 or
years,
something
25 years,
yeah.
he will own. And reportedly part of the thinking there is like, this is like buying a house. This is an investment. This is something my family can have forever.
Right.
And they can continue, it's an annuity. They can continue to make money off of it. So just like purely from the business perspective, and I didn't listen to that episode of The Town yet, so I don't know if Matt talked about this, but the idea of like, if we get enough people to accept that maybe it's better as a TV show, Horizon could be something that continues to make money for them for a long time. It's so clearly going to be such a red letter, splatterfest on the pages of the trades on Sunday morning, where it's
Right.
like Horizon, $8.7 million, disaster, Costner, cooked. What happens to part 2?
And one thing he has producer Mark Gill on, and one thing they explain is that the box office does affect then the negotiation of the
Sure.
rights
Mhm.
on streaming and how much money you can get from VOD.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's, if the tracking continues, then it's going to be harder. They also just actually break down how Horizon was funded, which was very interesting, and what money it is or isn't getting back from international. Westerns don't do well internationally.
Yep.
So Costner is at the bottom of the pyramid of getting the money back, and they just have a lot more money
You're more
to get back.
tapped into the French mindset right now.
Yeah.
Do you think that like French tourists will be like, oh, Kevin,
Definitely in play.
Kevin,
Maybe.
Definitely in play.
the beauty, Sienna. If there was
Who was that? Macron? Who was
Yeah.
that?
I don't know what that was.
Okay. Was that Pepe Le Pew?
I don't like, so like I was curious about this though. If you could pick any of the sort of storylines of this movie, and be like, this would be the Amanda cut, this would be the Sean cut. I would like to just have this film. What would it be?
Well, I really like Sienna Miller. So, and that first hour, even though it does not have Kevin Costner in it, is quite upsetting.
The raid on the town is tremendous and very
incredibly
scary.
good filmmaking. Also inspired a lot of questions for me, like, do they have pajamas in the West? Or do you always just sleep in your clothes?
I thought they had dressing
No,
gowns.
but when the raid happens, they're still they were just like sleeping in their clothes, which I
weren't
guess
they just
makes
coming
sense.
from the party?
Yeah, but they're asleep.
Oh, okay.
Because the kids are asleep. I mean, maybe they weren't asleep. I have a lot of questions about bathing and clothing and how often you wash your clothes. And, because the Kevin Costner plotline, the mining town has like the public baths that he goes to.
Great opportunity for listeners to tune into the Settlers edition of JMO, which is a private Patreon feed we've been developing. I'm really excited about that series,
like a
hosted by Amanda.
Yeah.
Well, but I mean, how?
What did these gals wear when they went to sleep?
Yeah.
And just like in general, what is the definition of clean in the West? And are you ever clean? And, obviously because
like physically or morally?
I'm speaking physically.
Okay.
Morally,
I think you would have to make probably some allowances. I think allowances to like personal hygiene.
But it's like, so that lady taking a bath and a full bath as opposed to a sponge bath is obviously like a plot point. Using the drinking water, so she's not supposed to do that. But that thus implies that like no one else has bathed in any way in a long time.
Yeah.
I think that stands to on a wagon train. I think that's reasonable.
Will Patton's actually playing a 25-year-old in this movie. It's like,
I mean, then you begin to worry about like bacteria and stuff, and I don't know.
The life expectancy was like
5,
38.
Yeah,
like it was.
No. I know. Anyway. But Sienna Miller, despite all of that, like has these like immaculate sweaters that are like basically from the road
she's
draped in her one.
Screen,
No, it's incredible.
Golden tresses.
Yeah, and they're just like completely. There's not a speck of dirt in sight on any of them.
It was punishing to learn that she and I are the same age because I'm like, I thought she was like 31. Maybe,
Yeah, I mean,
like she's like it's crazy.
Someone like Sienna Miller, like she's genetically blessed. I think
she's good in the movie though. There are parts of that story that I think work for sure.
I also thought a lot of like Lost City of Z, which is like another like movie where she's playing like the aggrieved, not the aggrieved, but like the widowed wife or the what can be a very, very unrewarding role.
A woman left to confront the world by herself.
Yes, in times when the world was not that interested in a single woman, or a woman by herself. So she's really good in that. I think you'd have to like merge it with Costner at some point.
So okay, this was my big question. I was just texting with someone about this. This would be very groan-worthy because of what it indicates about what's happened in the past in Hollywood. But if you just put Kevin Costner in the Sam Worthington part, isn't the movie
then
better?
Just make a movie.
Isn't it like a more coherent thing?
Then
where
it's
like
just a movie though. That's the thing is like nobody just
we
wants
went to the movies.
I know, but
that's
nobody just is like, I have an idea for a 2-hour Western about a woman who experiences a tragedy and finds love with a cavalry captain.
But then I put Sam Worthington in the Kevin Costner part. That's my point because
he
that
can't stand up to Marigold.
Kevin Costner?
No, Sam Worthington.
Oh, Sam Worthington. Okay, who would you put in that part?
Literally,
Austin Butler.
And great. That would be really good.
It needs to be an older fellow,
okay,
who's had some experience with herding cattle. You know? So
in Sam Worthington
the guy
the
who's in his 40s? I don't know.
The weird trampy criminal who gets put down by Kevin Costner is giving off some Austin Butler.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, some wannabe vibes. That's true.
I agree with Amanda. I thought that the Sienna Miller, it was the most like fully fleshed out, like even like her like making the air tube underground thing.
With the rifle.
That whole sequence was awesome. And I actually found myself pretty affected by like her Sam Worthington thing and like her daughter giving the flowers to the cavalry officers leaving for the war. Like that was all really good.
Yeah.
And that was like a
Ruin
2-hour
that quilt.
Western in 1966.
Yes, for sure. I really like The Wagon Train, and it had me thinking. I don't think I could think of one since Meek's Cutoff. Like I couldn't think of a movie that had been made with that kind of a storyline, which is to me is always a very interesting storyline. In part because of what you're asking, where you're sort of like, so you guys are just on the road for 400 days, traveling across the entire country. That's amazing. The things that can happen, that can come up when that's going on. But we just didn't get enough of it to fully understand. I will say the one sequence that we didn't mention yet that I think is exceptional is when they get to sort of like the barter general store and the men are deciding whether or not to buy guns. And then there's the showdown between Native American guy and his son.
They're trying to get the kid to to do draw.
And that's that kid.
And that's that kid. Yeah.
So he escaped from the Sienna Miller.
He escaped
town?
from the raid on the town. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And he joined up with these bandits.
Like the next day, they're like, some of us are going to go scalp hunting and some of us are going to the fort. And the kid goes with the scalp hunters.
Oh.
Yes.
To identify the Apache who they saw.
Okay.
But that's where, James Russo is a part of that sequence. Jeff Fahey is a part of that sequence.
Okay.
And it's just like 10 dastardly guys in a room together.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out if anybody's going to get shot. And that is the stuff that great Westerns are made of. That's very similar to that Luke Wilson moment when he goes up to confront those two guys, where you're just like on the edge of your seat, being like, is there going to be a showdown or not? It's just surrounded by so many other things that that nothing is going to be completed. There's we have a long way to go.
Right. And they
story.
introduce 3 more plot lines. Like there's a Chinese immigrant
the
plot
whole
line.
General Malone Michael Angranaro plot line where he's like, I'm gonna get a mine going by faking out these
rich
guys.
But that was totally a wrong foot move, where they're like, actually, don't worry about these characters. They're not important anymore. We're going over with this guy. I was like, I thought that was kind of interesting, but it was Taylor Sheridan TV.
Yeah.
To your point. Very, very curious movie. I
feel
liked it.
Anticlimactic? Does this film is it not bad enough to be like, oh my God?
It's really not terrible at all.
Yeah.
So
at part times I'm like, this is pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just it's an odd artifact of this decision making that he landed on, and I'm curious to see how it materializes or doesn't in the world. It's interesting too that it's going up against A Quiet Place 3, which is this much more clearly communicated.
Right. Yes.
This is the third movie in a series of movies about this thing that happened. This one's the prequel.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's not like we're going to introduce a character, then that character's going to die. But the guy who's standing next to him, that's the guy you're going to follow. Okay, wait, we're going over here. We're going back to Montana.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? Anyway. Any other meaningful thoughts about this movie?
I will be one of the most anticipated things of the summer is Horizon Part 2. Because I want to see whether or not it makes the first one seem like a masterpiece.
Right.
You know what I mean? Can you watch Horizon Part 2 standalone and then Horizon Part 1 is like Godfather Part 2 where all the characters expand and take on a new weight?
How does it end? Is there another trailer?
Is it Horizon Part 3?
It's a really good question.
Does he bake in the possibility that he doesn't get financing for 3 and 4?
It's a very good question. We're going to find out on
August
16th.
We just talked about this movie for a half an hour or so. It's not even that funny. I have nothing there's nothing, I can't make fun of it. It's just
it's not bad.
It's not bad.
Just a cool Western.
Yeah.
But it's not that good. And I don't understand why you'd be for 2 decades, I've been chasing the tail of this tale.
That's what's fascinating about it. It is that we mythologized it on the show. And we were like, okay, that was all right.
He is mythology,
of course. But I'm always willing to take the bait when somebody's like, I'm betting it all.
Yeah.
I'm making my crazy vision. I love when people do. When the Here trailer came out, I was like, absolutely. Great idea. Let's do this. It could be terrible. I don't know. But I want to believe. We want to believe. And we at least get to believe in going to see Part 2, although not before Alien Romulus, which is opening on the same day.
Oh, so it was originally supposed to be August 2nd. Then they moved Trap and then pushed Horizon Part 2 back.
I thought it was always the 16th, was it not?
No, for a while it was definitely August 2nd because that's
16th now.
That's an important day.
Are we going to let's challenge one another. Let's go Romulus, Horizon 2, Romulus again.
I love it. I love that idea. Chris, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't come with a funny voice or an outrageous take.
You had your French guy.
That's true.
You had your Cahiers du Cinema critic came
Macron.
through.
Yeah.
Macron writing for Cahiers du Cinema is a good character for you.
Well, he's going to need a job soon.
This has been the episode. What are we doing next week? Oh, we're going to be back together because we have another movie auction.
Us?
Yeah, the three of us. Yeah.
And
auction part 2?
Yeah, and Horizon part 2 is on the table. Just for you.
Wow.
She's already trying to
should we duke it out?
bait me into getting it. Okay, cool.
Do you know what's coming out at the second half of the year? I mean, you know about Romulus. That's
I know how to look at the internet. Do I have just a feel of what's coming
what's
out?
In your, when we say...
Have you been at the Ivy talking to the guys? Have they been telling you about release dates? No.
When we say Q4, what comes to mind without you don't have your computer?
Is Here coming out at the end of the year?
November.
Okay, yeah, he just said that. Give me another
one.
He didn't
give me a date. Gosh, I really don't know.
You can't think of a single movie.
From Q4? I don't know.
Q3 it's usually a lot easier.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Q3's Romulus, right?
Okay.
Name a movie that hasn't been uttered.
Steven Soderbergh horror movie coming out?
Undated.
Black Bag? What about that one?
What's that?
Isn't that the spy movie or are they the same movie?
His other movie?
Yeah.
You just saying Steven Soderbergh movies? I don't even know if that movie's in production.
They're just he's probably filming something.
You're just going to who's a guy I like? Does he have something cooking right now?
Did you think that there was some elaborate arithmetic going on?
If this hasn't been a great tease for Auction Part 2, I don't know what could be. Thanks to Alea Zanaris. Thanks to Jack Sanders. Thanks to our producer, Bobby Wagner, for his work on this episode. We'll be back next week with an auction. See you then.